At T-Mobile, our critical mission is providing unparalleled 5G coverage for when connectivity is mission critical. Introducing T-Priority, America's best 5G network experience for first responders, even in times of congestion. More capacity, faster speeds, better coverage. T-Priority from T-Mobile, built for tomorrow's emergencies, ready today. Discover more at t-priority.com.
For qualifying organizations on eligible rate plans, coverage not available in some areas and may be impacted by emergencies.
Today, the beverage aisle looks a lot different than it used to. America's beverage companies are working together. We're delivering the options everyone wants. In fact, nearly 60% of beverages Americans buy have zero sugar. You'll find more variety than ever, including more of your favorites, now available with zero sugar. You'll also find more sizes and clear calorie information on the front of every can, bottle, and pack. We know when it comes to finding balance, the more choices, the better.
This podcast contains adult themes and language, and some of the things that we discuss may be disturbing to some listeners. In this podcast, we discuss sexual assault, torture, race, and murder. Listener discretion is advised. Please take care of yourself.
Let's get into the early life of Andre Crawford. Hit it, Beth.
Andre Crawford was born in Chicago on March 20th, 1962. His father left the family shortly after his birth. According to Crawford, his childhood was filled with sexual abuse and neglect.
Andre and his sister were placed in foster care as infants after authorities found them living alone in squalor. They were found underfed, dehydrated, and covered in sores and filth. That's really awful.
Awful, yeah.
Their mother admitted to authorities that she sometimes left them unattended for long periods of time.
Babies.
But sometimes, if you're a single mom and you have to work, I can imagine childcare is difficult.
Yeah.
And nobody cares that you have children that need to be taken care of.
Yeah.
So it might not have been entirely nefarious, her leaving her kids alone. It could have been, but we don't know, is what I wanted to say.
We don't know. Yeah.
Yeah.
So he spent most of his childhood in a foster home on the South Side, where he said that he was molested for years by an older girl who was also a foster child in the home. When he ran away and sought out his mother's family, he said they sex trafficked him.
But this is uncorroborated, and his mother's relatives deny the accusation. However, an investigator for his later defense testified that she found a history of violence, incest, and mental illness in Crawford's extended family.
Crawford began using drugs as a teenager, and as a result, he dropped out of school at the age of 17. In the early 80s, Crawford enlisted in the Army and later the Navy, but continued to use drugs. During this time, he was constantly disciplined, and he was eventually dishonorably discharged and returned to the South Side.
Crawford occasionally worked for the Chicago Sun-Times as a temporary worker, hired out for occasional shifts as a helper on delivery trucks. He would also sometimes go door to door, offering to do small jobs for cash. He was well known in Englewood and New City communities where he often ate, drank, and socialized and was known as Dre. Nowadays, everybody want to talk like they got something to say, but if it comes out when they move the lips, just a bunch of gibberish. So fuck all that because they forgot about Dre. Anyway, go ahead. Sorry.
He frequented soup kitchens and food pantries and handed out metal slugs that would work as good as quarters at the laundromat.
Oh.
At times, he slept at shelters or friends' houses, but more often, he slept outdoors or in abandoned buildings.
According to a former friend of Crawford's, quote, he was a mild-mannered guy. He never degraded women or said anything that would make you think he was violent. He was a nice guy, unquote. One article described him as, quote, a friendly sort who never turned down good barbecue or cokie malt liquor, unquote.
Have you ever heard of that before?
No, I haven't.
I haven't either. I had to look up malt liquor because I didn't really know what it was.
Okay,
Yeah.
well, I know what malt liquor is. I just never heard of the cokie brand. It could be an East Coast thing, and
It
I'm
could
new
be.
here.
Yeah. So have you had malt liquor before?
Of course. It's
you
cheap
have.
and it gets the job done.
Okay. I was reading it's like sweeter than beer.
Can be.
Okay.
Let me think.
A higher alcohol content.
That's it. That's why I
People
enjoyed
drink it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Okay.
mean, you could get a 40 of like Old English or Steel Reserve for like $2.50. And in college,
That was it.
that was plenty.
Yeah.
My nickname was 40 in college because I drank a lot of malt liquor 40s. And now look at me. It ruined my life. Just kidding.
And that's why you don't drink,
And
kids.
that's why I don't drink like that anymore.
So another man said, quote, everybody knew Dre. We used to play dominoes together, eat barbecue, and he used to be out here drinking beer all the time. He seemed like a normal person to me, unquote.
Playing dominoes. Beth, do you know how to play dominoes?
I do, yeah.
What?
Well, I have played it before.
Oh,
quite a while ago, so I would need a
Okay.
refresher probably.
Oh my God. Well, I guess I'm going to bring my Uno and my dominoes to crime time.
Yeah.
Here we go. So back to Andre. So sorry. His ordinary demeanor allowed him to blend easily into the community. Crawford participated in Operation Safe Passage, which was sort of like a neighborhood watch program where adults would escort children through dangerous neighborhoods to school and stuff like that. He also helped police pass out flyers seeking information on serial killings, and I believe that some of the flyers might have had his picture on them. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah, that's nuts. So between March 1993 and November 1999, Crawford was repeatedly arrested on multiple charges, including felony theft, attempted sexual assault, and possession, once spending over a year in the Cook County Jail for sexual assault. The charges were dropped the following year when the victim failed to appear in court.
People in the neighborhood who knew the woman said she had a hard time getting people to believe her story because she used drugs, which is not a reason.
No.
Does not discount what happened to somebody.
Yeah.
But the woman ended up moving from the neighborhood rather than going to court.
Mm.
So now let's get into the timeline. What do you got, Beth?
Crawford killed women after luring them to secluded areas with deals to swap drugs for sex. The victims were all Black women, and most of them were murdered after Crawford became angry when the women wanted to get high before sex or decided to leave the situation before the deal went down. He actually knew most of them and had known them for years.
Okay.
Most of the victims were strangled and beaten. Crawford also sexually assaulted the victims after they were dead.
That's what we would call necrophilia, right?
Yes.
Oh, do you have
Yes.
true crime? Thank
Yes.
you. So on September 23rd, 1993, a building inspector monitoring an abandoned property in Chicago's South Side stumbled upon the dead body of a woman on a loading dock and called the police. The victim was naked from the waist down and had abrasions and defensive wounds on her hands. Investigators were struck by the fact that her face, which had been brutally beaten, was covered by a cloth. A burlap bag was found under her body.
Investigators also observed that while the rest of the victim's clothes were at the scene, her shoes were missing. Police suspected that she had been sexually assaulted. The medical examiner, however, found no evidence of rape. Major damage to head and face indicated that she'd been brutally beaten.
And there's got to be something about the brutality and then covering up the face, right?
Yes, it's shame.
So, using fingerprints, police identified the victim as 37-year-old Patricia Dunn, who lived in Englewood. Her loved ones described her as very happy, very loving, elegant, classy, and a role model. Patricia was considered the glue in her family, and she was raising 6 children who were not her own.
Patricia also had a lot of friends, and they were very forthcoming. They wanted to help police find her killer. Police combed the area for leads, but with no witnesses, DNA evidence, or fingerprints left by the assailant, the case went cold.
On December 21st, 1994, an individual who was renovating a boarded-up building found 18-year-old Rhonda King's partially skeletonized body on the 3rd floor. Rhonda's body was unclothed except for a coat and cushion covering her head.
The body was in a bad state of decomposition, and the medical examiner could find no obvious signs of trauma. However, a bloodstain had been found about 2 feet from Rhonda's head, and there appeared to be bloodstains on her clothing. She was identified through an ID card. The cause of death was listed as undetermined. Police suspected that foul play had been involved, but absent any evidence, the case went cold.
On April 3rd, 1995, kids exploring an abandoned house a few blocks from the Patricia Dunn crime scene discovered a woman's body. Like Patricia, the victim was nude below the waist, and her face, which had been severely battered, was covered, this time with a blanket.
An electrical cord was wrapped around her neck, and there was bruising on her forehead and left eye. Her shoes were missing, but her other clothes were found in the room. A Chicago police detective said the similarities to Patricia Dunn's case were quote-unquote striking.
As police worked the scene, the body was sent to the medical examiner, who determined that the victim had been strangled to death and sexually assaulted. She was identified by her fingerprints as Angela Shatine, 36, nicknamed Angel. Despite the fact that DNA had been recovered from her body, the case went cold.
Support comes from ServiceNow. We're for people doing the creative work they actually want to do. That's why this ad was written and read by a real person and not AI. You know what people don't want to do? Boring, busy work. Now with AI agents built into the ServiceNow platform, you can automate millions of repetitive tasks in every corner of your business, IT, HR, and more, so your people can focus on the work that they want to do. That's putting AI agents to work for people. It's your turn. Visit servicenow.com.
Revolutionize your cooking with the Tefal Infrared Air Fryer. Watch as your food crisps up through a large lighted window and delight in faster, crispier, and juicier results with no preheating, thanks to Tefal's advanced infrared technology. Discover the future of cooking and bring innovation into your kitchen by visiting Tefal.com.
On June 19th, 1995, police interviewed Hubert Geralds, the other serial killer working in the same area, who at the time was in custody for 6 murders. Geralds was shown a photograph of Rhonda King. Geralds said that Rhonda was one of the women that he strangled and killed, and he provided a written statement to that effect. He was later convicted of her murder and sentenced to death, but that conviction was vacated in 2000.
2 years after Angela's body was found on Thanksgiving Day, 1997, Claudia Robinson, 42, left her family's Thanksgiving dinner with her sister, and the two of them went to a friend's house. Claudia later left alone and headed for a bus stop.
According to Claudia, as she was walking, she was approached by a man who started a conversation and then forced her by knife point into an abandoned building. The man made her remove her clothes and then raped her while holding a knife to her throat.
Claudia said that she grabbed the knife, cutting her fingers. The blade broke free of the handle, and she threw the blade. The man then wrapped what Claudia believed to be a telephone cord around her neck, and Claudia lost consciousness.
When she regained consciousness, she heard the man walk up to her and say, quote, "Oh, you one of them bad bitches," unquote.
Oh.
He then took a 2x4 and struck her repeatedly about the head.
Oh my.
Claudia used her hands to try to block the blows, and the beating removed the skin from the top of her hands. She heard her leg breaking as the man struck her.
Oh my.
So it was
God.
vicious. It was a vicious beating.
Oh my gosh. Yes, it sounds like it. Claudia played dead, and the perpetrator threw a mattress over her body and took her shoes. She was able to drag herself out of the building and screamed for help. She survived, thankfully.
Yeah.
But she required 52 stitches to her head. Her cheekbone was broken, and her arms, legs, and wrists were all broken. She was hospitalized for 3 months, and her legs were so badly shattered that she spent the next 4 months learning how to walk again.
That's amazing that she was able to drag herself out of the building.
It is.
I don't know how she did that.
Unbelievable. Yeah. Angels were, I don't even know how you explain it, but golly, it's amazing that she survived.
Yeah. So a rape kit was performed and DNA was found that matched genetic material found on Angela. Claudia described her attacker to police as a black male who was about 6 feet tall, and she helped detectives create a composite sketch, which they distributed around the neighborhood. And Crawford
he was helping.
Probably helped. Yeah. Did you watch Mark of a Serial Killer or Mark of a Killer?
No, was there an episode on this guy?
Yeah, on this guy.
No, I did not.
Yeah, so they showed the composite, and it was like a black spot.
What?
Yeah,
what?
I could not see any of the
God.
features.
Wow. See, this representation matters. Even BIPOC people should be part of those teams that are putting together these composite sketches because the features might be turned into a blob from somebody.
Basically it was a blob.
Yeah, that is so interesting. Well, did it help? Let's find out.
No, it didn't help because Crawford was passing him out. He's like, nope, that doesn't look anything like me.
Want a flyer? So, according to the police, detectives worked diligently to forge a relationship with locals, including sex workers, gang members, and others. They believed someone out there could have a clue, but progress on the case was minimal for 9 months.
Then on August 13th, 1998, the bodies of 2 women were found on the same day in 2 abandoned buildings located about a mile apart. That's wild.
Yeah.
Nicole Townsend, 32, and Andre Harris, 44, had been beaten. Their faces were covered and their shoes were nowhere to be found.
Can you imagine how just terrifying it would have been to be in Englewood or the South Side
at this time
with all of this? And then we talked about what the community was like due to redlining. So people are under-resourced, over-policed, but also don't trust the police. And these bad things are happening, and the police are coming in claiming to want to help solve the murders.
You don't trust them.
Right, but you don't trust them. So it's just like, terrifying.
Awful.
You're damned if you do, damned if you don't is the best way I can describe what that might feel like.
That's pretty accurate.
Autopsy revealed that Nicole Townsend had died of strangulation. Her body was in an advanced state of composition, so DNA was not found on her body, but was found on a piece of pantyhose located close to her body.
DNA was found on the body of Andre Harris, and the DNA from both victims matched genetic evidence recovered from Claudia Robinson and Angela Chatine. So they're matching the DNA to all these bodies.
Yes, but my understanding is that they're matching DNA finally in 1998, but they had his DNA earlier than that. They just didn't put it into the system to, like, CODIS, is that what it's called?
Yeah, but I didn't read that.
Oh.
What I read was that he was arrested multiple times, but they never took his DNA.
Oh, they didn't collect it at all?
Yeah.
Oh, well, that's even more fucked up. Jesus. Yeah. Didn't anybody see Jurassic Park in 1994? Come on. I don't understand why everybody was like, DNA, solving all these crimes.
Actually, it was pretty new in the 90s. It was like the late 80s was when they first started using DNA. Mm-hmm. And so in the 90s, it was pretty new technology. And it took a while before it really caught on.
Yeah, I understand that. And I also understand that it had to be explained to juries. Like, if it was used
they didn't always trust it.
Yes, exactly.
Because it was new.
Again, did you not see the hit Jurassic Park? Jesus. I'll trust anything that can get me a dinosaur. So, on December 8th, 1998, the body of Cheryl Cross, 38, was found in the attic of an abandoned home. She was naked from the waist down, and she had substantial injuries to her face, including a laceration across her forehead and loose teeth around her body.
Yeah.
The bones in Cross's forehead and nose were fractured. She also had substantial injuries to her skull and scalp.
A section of rope was still around Cheryl's neck, and a knife blade was lodged in her back. She had abrasions on the right side of her neck, the left side of her face, and on her right knee. The cause of death was determined to be a stab wound to the back with blunt force trauma to the head, a significant contributing factor.
A section of 2x4 was found underneath Cheryl's body and another piece to the right of her head. On the second floor, an investigator found another knife with an alligator logo on the handle, which was later tied to Crawford. And again, DNA evidence was found which matched the other victims.
On April 20th, 1999, around midnight, a Chicago police officer went into a boarded-up abandoned home for the purpose of conducting narcotics surveillance. As he was clearing the location, he saw a body by the light of his flashlight.
The victim was Cheryl Johnson, 44. Like the other victims, she was naked below the waist, And her shoes were missing, and DNA matched that found on the other women. The cause of death was determined to be manual strangulation.
In June of 1999, the body of Constance Bailey, 41, was found in an abandoned tire shop. She was known on the streets as Tiny and Shorty.
3 other women were murdered: Tommy Dennis, Sonia Brandon, and Shaquanta Pumpkin Langley. But we were unfortunately unable to find information about those women.
Yeah, and I really tried. I couldn't find.
I always try. I always go to Legacy to see, and it's
Google their
hard.
names,
and
and
it starts with an R and ends with a
Yeah.
Because it also costs money.
You guys know the rest.
You know the deal. It costs money to do an obituary in the newspaper, right?
Yeah.
Not everybody has those resources as maybe as simple as it sounds to us who have the means to pay for something to go in the newspaper. It's not free.
Even if it's like, I can't remember how much it costs. It's not that much, but even $25 to a person who doesn't have much, it might as well be $1,000.
Exactly.
It's a lot of money for somebody who doesn't have much.
Thank you. That's my friend over there.
Been there, done that.
Yeah. Yep.
In June of 1999, Chicago lab serologist Denise Troche decided to test the burlap bag found underneath the body of Patricia Dunn for semen. It tested positive, and DNA was extracted, which matched the DNA found on the other victims.
I love it. Out of the 11 women killed, 7 of them had DNA in some fashion. The one survivor, Claudia Robinson, also had DNA. So in 8 of the 12 cases, DNA evidence tied the victims to a single male suspect. So now let's get into the investigation and the arrest. Hit it, Beth!
With the murder count rising, the FBI got involved with the case and a joint task force was formed, comprised of officers and agents of the Chicago Police Department and the FBI.
The community was on high alert and held meetings to discuss the case. Crawford went to the community meetings, motherfucker, where police and residents discussed the South Side killings and the police investigation. And, as we mentioned earlier, he helped police pass out flyers seeking information on the murders. That is so nasty. And this is not the first guy that we've covered who did this kind of thing. And I just hate it so much.
I was just thinking of the guy who went to a barbecue.
Yeah, people are fixing him plates. Get out of here.
Yeah.
Fuck out of here. What the? Oh my God.
The Chicago Police Department, as part of the task force, continued to canvass the neighborhood, where they took DNA swabs of men who agreed to give a sample voluntarily. They collected more than 500 DNA samples this way, but there was no match.
2 women came forward with a tip about a man who went by the name Dre, who was known for getting violent with women in abandoned buildings. Another person told police about a man called Andre, who'd get high with sex workers in empty buildings. So the streets were talking.
Yeah, the streets were talking. Another woman told police that she'd known Andre since 1992, when she was making a living swapping sex for drugs. At the time, she lived with a man who allowed crack users to get high in his apartment.
Crawford was a regular there, as were Patricia Dunn, Tommy Dennis, Sonia Brandon, Constance Bailey, Cheryl Johnson, and Pumpkin Langley. 6 of the 10 women who were murdered.
Wow.
That is more than a coincidence.
Yeah,
what you say?
Definitely.
Got him.
Yeah. So this woman who knew Andre Crawford, she started to suspect that he was one of the Southside killers. In December of 1999, he sat behind her on a bus and told her the victims deserved to die.
Oh.
She remembered him saying, quote, "They need to be strangled and have their heads beaten in," unquote.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, congratulations. You played yourself.
Yeah.
Take that man to jail right now. Investigators identified their suspect as Andre Crawford, who was from the area and had been incarcerated for drug and sexual assault arrests. Police created a timeline of when Crawford was in lockup, and a pattern emerged. When he was behind bars, the murder stopped. When he was out, they started back up again. Wow, they did it. Way to go, Chicago PD. According to investigators, that was their aha moment. These people, okay, this is 10 years in now. Aha.
Crawford was arrested on January 28, 2000 on an unrelated matter and brought in for questioning, and he subsequently agreed to submit a DNA sample after police informed him that they had a court order.
Oh.
Then he began confessing.
He spent 3 days confessing to the killings, which included murders that police hadn't yet linked to the case. Crawford told police that he exchanged drugs for sex. After taking his victims to abandoned buildings, if the women either backed out of the deal or demanded the drugs first, he became angry and violent.
Crawford stabbed, beat, or strangled them, then raped them as they lay dying and again after they were dead. After disposing of their clothes, he often took a walk, smoked cocaine, then returned to have sex with the bodies again. He stated that he enjoyed having sex with dead bodies.
Crawford routinely took his victims' shoes, and he told police that he did this so they could not detect his fingerprints on them. What about all the other places?
Yeah, I don't buy that.
Yeah, but he did not graduate from high school. So anyway,
True.
And then he sold them on an Englewood street corner. He said that he sold one pair of designer shoes worn by Sanjay Brandon for $20.
So I think he took the victims' shoes as trophies, but since he didn't have a place to live, then he would eventually sell them.
Right. That makes sense.
Yeah, I think he got a kick out of keeping their shoes. Something about the shoes he really liked.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that, it's not my thing, but you know what? Yeah, it's just not my, none of Crawford's
None of any of this is your thing.
Yeah. I was going to say, I love that for you, Crawford, but I don't. Actually.
No, I hate that for you.
I hate it. I hate it all. And I hate you, Crawford.
So Crawford also confessed to the murder of Rhonda King, and his version of events matched the crime scene. He confessed to 11 murders in all, and his DNA physically linked him to 7 of those crimes.
Crawford's lawyers maintain that he made the confession after police threatened to place him in a jail cell with rival gang members, then provided him with drugs and allowed him to get high, which it's a Chicago PD. I wouldn't put it past him. Just saying.
Yeah, but he's guilty.
He is. Totally. But also the Chicago PD is guilty of fuckery as well.
Yeah.
TaxAct knows small business owners can sometimes use a little help with their taxes. That's why TaxAct has Expert Assist, a team of live tax experts ready to answer any questions you may have. Think of them as your own personal sidekick. Not like one of those funny talking animal sidekicks, more like the super smart nerding out on tax code and business casual attire sidekick, but just as helpful and lovable. TaxAct. Let's get them over with.
Now let's dive into the trial, Beth. Splish splash.
Crawford was charged with over 200 counts concerning the first-degree murders and aggravated criminal sexual assaults of Cheryl Johnson, Tommy Dennis, Shagwanta Langley, Sonji Brandon, Cheryl Cross, Avondre Harris, Nicole Townsend, and Constance Bailey.
That's a lot of charges. It almost reminds me of somebody in the news right now has a lot of felony charges.
Oh, yeah. I wonder who.
I think it's like 90 felony charges. It's so crazy that one person can have so many charges. Anyway, in addition, the state charged Crawford with 3 counts each for the first-degree murders of Patricia Dunn, Angela Shatine, and Rhonda King. He was not charged with their rapes because the statute of limitations for those crimes had expired by the time of his arrest. And I don't know if that's still the case with rape.
Yeah, I don't know. They've been changing the laws recently, so it might not be. Yeah.
Got it.
Finally, the state charged Crawford with 17 counts related to the aggravated criminal sexual assault and attempted murder of Claudia Robinson. The parties agreed to join the 12 cases for trial before a single jury.
The hunt for an Englewood serial killer made headlines in the late 1990s, but quickly disappeared from public consciousness after Crawford's arrest in January 2000. It wasn't until 9 years later, and more than 16 years after his first victim was found, that Crawford went on trial. That is a long time.
Yeah.
Weird to me because they have DNA evidence. So what are they?
Very
what
weird.
else?
I don't
what
know.
do they need all that time to prepare for? But
I don't know.
so few, if any, of the 100 prospective jurors seemed to recognize his name as the charges against him were read in court.
Over the course of the nearly month-long trial that began in November of 2009, about 90 witnesses testified and approximately 450 exhibits were admitted. Jurors heard that DNA evidence linked him to 7 of the dead, as well as to the survivor. The other bodies were so badly decomposed that no DNA could be recovered.
They viewed dozens of grisly photos of the victims after they were found. The jurors also watched videotape statements in which Crawford confessed to all 11 murders and rapes, as well as the assault on Claudia Robinson.
The defense tried to raise doubt about the prosecution's case by highlighting that another man was previously convicted and sentenced to death for the 1994 murder of Rhonda King. Charges against that man, Hubert Geralds, were dropped after Crawford's arrest in January 2000. Crawford's defense team suggested that Crawford was coached into confessing to King's murder, which, I mean,
he
that's
wasn't.
Possible,
but the Chicago PD did do that.
Yeah.
And would torture black men
yeah.
by putting cattle prods on their genitals and poison in their nose and take them to the train tracks. It was a whole organized thing. So, yeah, we know they did it, but
this
in
happened,
this case,
but in this case, he's guilty.
Yes. But Crawford was found guilty of 11 murders, 9 rapes, and an attempted murder. As the verdicts were announced, relatives of the victims cried quietly and hugged, passing tissues to each other. No one was there for Crawford, who showed no emotion as he sat at the defense table.
In mitigation, Dr. John Fabian, a forensic neuropsychologist who evaluated Crawford, found that his mother was negligent and abusive, and he theorized that, quote, he wanted to make these women suffer because that's what he wanted to do to his mother, unquote. Covering victims' faces could indicate shame or regret.
Crawford's attorney, Deborah Seaton, said that it was no wonder his view of women was twisted, and, quote, the story of his childhood is not an excuse for killing these women, but the story of his life at least gives a framework to understand how this man came to this place. If we look at the types of women that were killed, they were exactly like his mother, unquote, prompting half a dozen of the victims' relatives to stomp out of the courtroom.
Yeah, that wasn't cool.
Yeah, it would definitely be offensive to hear about your family member.
Yes.
I know that she's not trying to say they deserve it.
But it sounds like that.
It does, kind of. Yeah.
Or, his mom was not great, and these victims were not great either,
Yeah.
It was offensive.
It's reductive. Yeah. And offensive.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Assistant State Attorneys James McKay and George Canellis countered that Crawford's allegations of childhood abuse were nothing more than uncorroborated tales from a man facing death for crimes that terrorized Chicago's New City and Englewood neighborhoods for much of the 1990s. Canellis said that even after his arrest in 2000, Crawford continued to prey on the weak in Cook County Jail, allegedly raping a cellmate.
No. Wow. The jury found him to be eligible for the death penalty, but did not impose it. The vote had to be unanimous in order to impose the death penalty, and it was not. He was instead sentenced to life imprisonment. So now let's get into where are they now? Tell us, Beth.
Well, DEAD dead.
Good riddance.
Yeah, good riddance. Crawford died in prison on March of 2017 from liver cancer, 2 days before he would have turned 55.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, let's get into our takes. What are your thoughts on this one, Beth?
Well, one of the most well-known cases out of Chicago is of John Wayne Gacy. Ever heard of him?
Girl, who? I'm just kidding.
Yeah, he's infamous. But I never even heard of this guy.
And,
there's some pretty gory details in this case.
Yeah.
And
salacious that would have sold
yes.
lots of newspapers that would have gotten a lot of attention. So it is interesting. We didn't hear about them.
It is, and I wonder why.
Does it start with an R and end with an A, Sizzle?
Yes. I don't really wonder why. The killer and the victims were Black and involved with drugs and sex work, so nobody cared. They cared when there was a killer on the loose because they were scared, but then promptly forgot about it when he was arrested. And like I mentioned before, it was extremely difficult to find any information about the victims. I looked all over the place, and that's what happens when a serial killer is forgotten about. The victims are forgotten about too.
Yes.
And that's really sad.
That's deep, friend.
Yeah.
That's I mean, it's to hear you say it out loud, it's like, oh yeah.
Yeah. Now, why he snapped? Well, again, he had a horrible childhood, or at least the beginning was. And I don't know how you recover from that level of neglect as a baby. That really fucks you up.
Yeah.
I don't know about his foster family. He said that he was molested by another foster child, and that's possible, but people said there was no corroborating evidence. But it's possible his whole childhood sucked. So
yeah.
But he hated his mom. Hated her.
Did. Yeah.
With good reason.
Yeah.
And he was taking it out on these women.
Yeah.
And the necrophilia, I read somewhere that it's the ultimate control. You have absolute control over the women's bodies and don't have to deal with a living person. So it's a way to get close to somebody without having to
face rejection or hurt.
Yes. Or, just deal with another person who has opinions.
So sick of these people and their opinions and emotions.
Mouthy.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's gross, but that's what it's about, I think.
Yeah, I thought so too. And I agree. He had an unfortunate childhood. He didn't have his mom in his life and did seem to be very angry with her. This made me think of the Tupac song, "And even as a crack fiend mama, you always was a black queen mama." And in like the same line, he is like, "Mom, I hate you, but also
Mom, I love you."
Yeah. So it's a complicated relationship.
We all want our moms to love us.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if they don't, then it's really damaging to our psyches.
Yeah, it is. It is. And clearly damaging to Crawford.
Yeah.
Because he not only did he hate women, but disregard for human life.
Yeah.
And maybe this is a stretch, but, a dead body can't abandon you.
Yeah.
Like his mother did.
Right. You can abandon a dead body.
Exactly. See, psychology, OG of true crime is teaching me things. So, I wanted to touch on, we gave all those stats about the living conditions and why they are what they are.
Yep.
It should be no surprise that infant mortality rates in the United States for Black kids are very bad. And we're supposed to be the richest country in the world.
I know.
But if they survive in a place that is under-resourced and over-policed in a red line city, then we also shouldn't be surprised if those kids end up with a poor quality of life.
Right.
Engaged in illicit drugs, committing crimes of survival, and end up incarcerated or dead. So we should be ashamed because that's essentially the situation that Crawford, but also the victims found themselves in.
Yeah. We're just throwing people away.
We are.
Yeah.
And it really, a lot of it depends on what you look like and your socioeconomic status.
Yeah.
DNA was new in the 90s, but the police didn't collect it, which I say, fuck those messy ass hoes. And this took place during the crack era. Crack devastated everyone in the communities that it touched. Crawford used crack cocaine, and the victims did too. And crack, like other substances, are sometimes what people turn to when they are in pain or despair.
Right.
And also, I too thought it was wild there was another serial killer operating at the same time. I feel for the community navigating the systems of, white supremacy and oppression that contributed to the problem by looking the other way because of who the victims were.
Yeah.
And it's also interesting that there are some who believe that there's a serial killer active right now, or at least
Chicago.
In Chicago a few years ago. Remember somebody came up to us at CrimeCon and was like, And then we also talked to that guy who wanted to do like a TV show or something with us.
Yeah.
About this issue in Chicago, which if you're considering Crawford's time and today, not much has changed. The problem of missing and murdered Black and brown women continues. And I think that's the saddest part of all.
And I think there's something like 50 victims in
Chicago.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Yep.
Yeah.
So, well, I'm sad again. So,
you're welcome.
Thank you. So that's it for the story. Let us know what you thought. Beth, where can the people find us?
Our website is fruitloopspod.com, and we use Fruit Loops Pod for all of our social media.
This is a weekly podcast, and new episodes drop every Thursday. So until next time, look alive, y'all. It's crazy out there.
I want to take a moment to tell you about my podcast, Carol Costello Presents Blind Rage. In 1984, a woman named Phyllis Cottle was abducted in broad daylight, tortured, and left to die in a burning car in Akron, Ohio. At the time, I was a rookie reporter covering this horrific story. Since then, I've reported every kind of crime imaginable. I've been able to leave most of them at work, but not this one, the one that buried itself under my skin and stayed put. Phyllis Cottle was a badass woman, and I want to tell you her story. A production of Evergreen Podcasts and signature title of the Killer Podcast Network, you can find Carol Costello Presents Blind Rage wherever you get your podcasts. Discover more great true crime and paranormal programming at killerpodcast.com.
Hey, podcast listeners, I'm Paul Brandis introducing my podcast, Countdown to Dallas. It's a fascinating, in-depth look at the seemingly unconnected events that led to the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. It's based on my book of the same title. In that book and in this podcast, I go all the way back to 1939, when Lee Harvey Oswald was born into a troubled and dysfunctional family. I'll follow his transient and often violent teenage years and young adulthood, painting a fuller picture of the man who would later become Kennedy's killer. I also take a look at events unfolding in that era, like Cuba and Vietnam, and I'll unpack the conspiracy theories too, not one of which has ever been conclusively proven. Subscribe to Countdown to Dallas at evergreenpodcasts.com or your favorite listening app, October 31st.